You're watching Middle East Now here on I-24 News, and these are today's headlines. The IDF has targeted Hamas military infrastructure embedded within the humanitarian zone of Al-Mawasi in Gaza, triggering international outrage. And the European Union says that Iran has been transferring ballistic missiles to Russia in a move that could inflame the region. Plus, polls have opened in Jordan for the country's latest parliamentary election, but voter dissatisfaction is running high amid the war in Gaza. We'll tell you why. I'm Natasha Kirchak, and this is Middle East Now. It is day 340 of the Israel-Hamas war, and the fighting continues. The IDF has targeted a Hamas command and control center embedded within the humanitarian zone of Al-Mawasi in Gaza. And while Hamas officials initially claimed at least 40 people, mostly civilians, were killed, the Israeli military has strongly disputed these numbers, calling them exaggerated. Well, as a result, the Gaza Health Ministry has now revised that death toll down to 19, and we have more in this report.
At least 40 people were reportedly killed and 60 injured during an Israeli strike on the humanitarian zone of Al-Mawasi near Han Yunis in Gaza in the early hours of Tuesday. These were the initial figures released by the Hamas-controlled Gaza Civil Defense. But the Israel Defense Forces stated that the presented numbers do not match the military's intelligence assessment.
According to the IDF's initial review, the numbers published by the Hamas-run Government Information Office in Gaza, which, by the way, time and time again has consistently broadcast fake news and false information. Sometimes it's called the Data Information Office, sometimes it's called the Civilian Defense Office. Once again, their reports this time, sadly often parroted by many in the media, did not align with the truth.
Gaza's health ministry later updated the death toll, lowering it to 19. According to the IDF, its fighter jets precisely targeted significant Hamas terrorists operating within a command and control center intentionally placed within a civilian area. Among those killed were senior Hamas figures, Samer Ismail Khadr Abu Daqqa, head of Hamas's aerial unit, Osama Tabesh, head of the Observation and Targets Department in Hamas's military intelligence, and Ayman Mabhou, another high-ranking Hamas operative. Despite Hamas's claim that none of its operatives were present at the time of the strike, Israel reiterated that terrorist groups in Gaza are known to systematically exploit civilian areas and humanitarian infrastructure to shield their activities. The Israeli military says it took extensive measures to minimize harm to civilians before carrying out the strike. These efforts included using precision munitions and conducting aerial surveillance to ensure that only legitimate military targets were hit. Eyewitnesses reported that at least 4 missiles hit the area, creating large craters and burying at least 20 tents in the sand.
My tent is destroyed. My belongings are gone. I don't know how we can live, and I don't know where to go. Where can we go? Find us a solution. We are under siege, destroyed. Nothing is reaching us. We have no food or water or anything. We are peaceful people. We do not have anything to do with resistance.
Al-Mawasi, a coastal area in southern Gaza, has become a refuge for tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war on October 7th. This is not the first time Israel has had to strike Al-Mawasi in pursuit of Hamas commanders. In mid-July, an Israeli strike targeting Hamas military chief Mohammed Deif resulted in dozens of civilian casualties, a consequence of Hamas's tactic of embedding within civilian populations.
Well, joining us now in the studio is military and strategic affairs analyst Yaakov Lapin. So I'd like to first talk about kind of just these differing numbers that we saw come out. This is certainly not the first time that the Hamas-run health ministry has put out a number in terms of the amount of people killed in an IDF strike, which the IDF says is targeting Hamas military infrastructure or commanders, you name it. And then, of course, the response from the health ministry is that only civilians have been killed in this. How is the Gaza Health Ministry calculating these numbers, and how are they able, in this case, to so quickly put that number 40 out and then revise it? And why did they revise it? Because they don't typically do that.
I have deja vu. I think we've been in this movie many times before. A strike occurs. The Gazan Health Ministry, which is a Hamas propaganda branch, releases what appears to be a fabricated number. It's not like they're going around counting bodies. They don't even have that ability in half of these cases to get to the scene and start counting. They systematically hide the names of terrorists because this is Hamas. Hamas is not going to openly report on its own activities, its military terrorist activities to the world. So they have every interest in fabricating facts, which are unfortunately time and again just naively accepted by sections of the international media. And then we see these revisions, but by the time these revisions occur, people have lost interest around the world. So we've been through this movie many times. I remember, going back to the strike on Al-Ilha Hospital. I think that was back in November. Right. And then repeatedly, Hamas systematically embeds itself in every civilian institution possible, mosques, hospitals, schools. This is their modus operandi. Now, the good news is that this is not stopping Israel from operating against Hamas's center of gravity, its operational center of gravity. But the bad news is that there doesn't seem to be a way to force, and when I say force, I mean compel sections of the international community to not take at face value Hamas's reports on what's going on the ground.
Of course, there are civilian casualties, right? And that is fundamentally one of the major issues here. IDF is saying that it's specifically, obviously, targeting Hamas infrastructure, but because of where that infrastructure is embedded, we're seeing civilian casualties. The question is what the numbers are, what the actual breakdown is. But I do want to turn to the ongoing fighting that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip. We saw comments coming out from top IDF brass essentially saying that they're kind of zeroing in on Hamas targets and there's going to be more of a focus on the north of Israel right now. But what does that mean?
So, we're hearing from the IDF today and in recent days that essentially the main military targets that can be achieved now have been achieved. And that means the disbanding of Hamas's organized military formations. They have completed disbanding the Hamas Rafah Brigade, the Tel al-Sultan Battalion. This was one of the last battalions that Hamas had up and running in the Gaza Strip. That doesn't mean that every terrorist is killed or injured or taken into Israeli custody. What it means is that Hamas has lost the ability to function as an army. It's reverted back to this asymmetric guerrilla hit-and-run underground terror movement. It's going to remain in that state for a very long time unless Israel withdraws from Gaza and allows it to rebuild itself. But if that doesn't happen, it's going to revert back to that. And that has been one of the main goals of this operation, of this entire war. What Israel has not done is answer the question of who is going to rule Gaza politically. We still have Hamas seizing aid, international aid, distributing it, and basically signaling to Gazans that it plans on being the regime on the day after this war. Right. And so long as that happens, there's going to be a big question mark over who will rule Gaza politically, but militarily, because this has happened, what I've just described, the IDF is moving more and more forces up north, training them, preparing them for whatever may come against Hezbollah up in Lebanon.
All right, well, we're going to turn right now to Egypt. Yaakov, stick with us. We'll be back with you shortly. Egypt is reportedly deliberately delaying the appointment of Israel's new ambassador to Cairo as tension soars between the two countries. Now, that's, of course, over the future of the Philadelphia corridor that is bordering Gaza and Egypt. Now, the Israeli government continues to insist that it is necessary to remain a military presence there to prevent Hamas from smuggling weapons and goods through its underground tunnel network into Egypt. But Egypt says that that is a violation of its peace accord with Israel. And I-24 news sources say that the Egyptians are taking their time to appoint a new ambassador as a form of punishment. Well, joining us now is a former assistant to the Egyptian Foreign Minister, Hussein Kamel Hariri. Let us begin with Abbas's attempts to visit the Gaza Strip. This also just came out. We know that Egypt insisted on Israel proving that visit, especially since it has become clear that Egypt doesn't usually ask Israel for approval on sending most things into Gaza. So the question is, why was that choice made now?
Well, the situation is very complicated now, and we are not sure what the Israelis are up to as far as the future of Gaza is concerned, as far as the future of their military presence in Gaza is concerned. So, of course, we are trying to get clear answers, sincere answers, as to the future plans of Israel as far as Gaza is concerned. For Egypt, Gaza it borders it's on our borders, and of course, definitely we are mainly concerned about Israeli moves in Gaza. We cannot dissociate what's going in Gaza from Israeli-Egyptian relations. You mentioned, Madam, at the outset that we are delaying the approval of the appointment of a new Israeli ambassador to Cairo. Usually, the process takes some time. It's not a question of 1 day or 1 week. Sometimes it takes 3 weeks in order to send what called diplomatically l'agrément. So let's not jump to conclusions. But of course, we have to admit that after 11 months of Israeli war against the Palestinians in Gaza, definitely this has had a negative impact on the relations between the two countries.
Right. Well, I mean, Israel has been launching a targeted war against Hamas, not against the Palestinians in Gaza, but Hamas. I just want to clarify that. And Egypt has threatened severing ties with Israel over the Philadelphia corridor dispute. Obviously, we know there is proof that for decades we have seen Hamas smuggling goods underneath its tunnel system into the Gaza Strip. So the question is, how is Egypt assuring Israel that if Israeli troops were to be removed from that border area, that Egypt would be able to continue prevent the smuggling of weapons in? And how seriously should Israel be taking these threats from Egypt that peace could fall apart?
Well, I don't recall that officially Egypt has said that the peace could fall apart with Israel. I don't remember any Egyptian official saying that. This is first thing. The second thing, Madam, we are sure that smuggling from Sinai to Gaza stopped long time ago. In the last few years, the Egyptian army closed around 1,500 tunnels that led from Sinai to Gaza. The third point that I would like to raise with you is that this is the fifth war between Israel and Hamas and Islamic Jihad from 2008-2009. This is the first time that Israel has brought up this question of smuggling of weapons and smuggling of fighters from Sinai to Gaza. So we don't know why this time the Israeli Prime Minister has brought up this, has accused Egypt that we have either had the intention of facilitating the smuggling of weapons, or we saw the other part. So this is not true. This is not true. And as long as Israel or the Israeli government would keep accusing Egypt of facilitating the smuggling of fighters and arms from Sinai to Gaza, I don't think that relations would be would go back to normal as they have been before October 7th last year. So the effort should be on the part of the Israeli government in order to make clear to not only to Egypt, to the Palestinians and to the international community, what are the future plans of Israel as far as Gaza is concerned. As far as the Egyptian position is concerned, we have made it clear. We have made it clear that we hope, we wish, we are working with the Americans, with the Qataris, even with the Israelis and the Palestinians for a complete cessation of hostilities in Gaza and a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza Strip, including the Philadelphia corridor. So what is the answer of the Israeli government?
Well, obviously, that's a good question. I think, as we wait to see if there's any kind of breakthrough in the ongoing negotiations, we're going to have a clearer picture of what is going to happen in the Philadelphia corridor, whether or not that is really the make or break issue for Netanyahu, as he's been claiming in recent weeks. It is certainly correct that he did not mention the Philadelphia corridor in quite a long time. You could say it was mentioned in the beginning of the war briefly, but it's now obviously become one of the main targets in terms of Israel's ongoing war against Hamas. So the question is, what comes next? But I'd like to thank you so much for joining us from Egypt. Meanwhile, we're going to be turning to Israeli reports, which Israel has essentially said that it's rejected allowing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to visit Gaza. Egypt had reportedly agreed to allow Abbas to enter via the Rafah border crossing, which I mentioned in the interview that we just had, but then demanded that Israel approve that visit, which it did not. And I'd like to turn back to our guests in the studio. We have Yaakov Lapin and now our correspondent, our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran, joining us. Okay, so you heard a little bit about what our guest from Egypt had to say, in regards more specifically to Abbas's visit. My first question is, why would Israel be against Abbas visiting the Gaza Strip, especially if there have been talks to have a kind of revamped sort of Palestinian Authority taking over control of the Gaza Strip in a post-war scenario?
Well, I think the Palestinian Authority knew that Israel would reject because Prime Minister Netanyahu has rejected any attempt to legitimize the Palestinian Authority under President Mahmoud Abbas, giving us the idiom not Hamas and not Abbas, meaning basically likening between the genocidal terror organization that is ruling the Gaza Strip since 2007 and carried out the deadliest attack in Israeli history, and the Palestinian Authority that, albeit does pay monthly stipends to family members of convicted terrorists, but Israel maintains security coordination with the Palestinian Authority on a daily basis. Even today, you could see that coordination going on in Tulkarem today as the forces are operating. So I think the fact that Israel is comparing the two and treating both as equally illegitimate, I think that is a mistake on Israel's part, because if it's not the PA, who is it going to be? And so if you want it to be a reformed PA, you need to pave a way for that reality. But in the absence of that, it was clear that Israel is going to refuse. The Palestinian Authority knew that. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a reformed Palestinian Authority, there is no one else currently with the capability to organizational, logistic, manpower to assume power in the Gaza Strip after Hamas, besides the Palestinian Authority. And so if you write them off, there is no one else to take Hamas's place. And that ensures Hamas's longevity as the rulers of Gaza.
Just going back to Abbas's visit, why has Abbas not visited the Gaza Strip since 2007? Break that down for our viewers.
Well, that's pretty simple because, in that year that you just mentioned, 2007, that was the year that Hamas stormed the Fatah PA's positions, conducted a violent Islamist coup, executed and killed hundreds of PA officials, and they haven't forgiven them to this day. This is an ongoing actual blood feud between Fatah and Hamas over that coup. And since then, the PA, has been unable to gain any foothold in Gaza. Clearly, it wasn't able to hold Gaza on its own in the past. I don't see any reason to believe that in the near future it could do the same. This seems pretty, much in the realm of fantasy land right now, to think that the PA can march into Gaza right now and control it after losing it under much easier conditions. I think that the only realistic course of action, at least for the coming months, is a basic minimal Israeli military administration in the Gaza Strip, which will take charge of the distribution of aid, food, medicine, water to the civilians of the Gaza Strip, and begin a gradual process of what really, in my opinion, needs to be proper regime change. This is also in line, by the way, with classic military doctrine. After you take an area and after you clear it from the enemy, the next step is to set up a military administration. This is standard military doctrine, which the American military is very familiar with. So Israel's hesitancy in doing this step is prolonging this war without any need. So that's basically the way I read it. And the idea of the PA coming in now, completely unrealistic in my view.
Right. All right. Well, we're going to turn to the West Bank now. The IDF says that it is highly likely that its forces unintentionally and indirectly shot Turkish-American activist Senur Ezgi Egi last Friday. Now, Egi was killed in the shooting, which the military says was not aimed at her, but rather at, quote, the key instigator of a violent riot at the Beitar Junction in the West Bank, where Palestinians were burning tires and hurling rocks at Israeli security forces. Now, Israel has not named the alleged instigator, and an investigation into the matter is currently being launched by the Military Police Criminal Investigation Division. I'd like to turn back to our guests in the studio. Ariel, what kind of investigation can we expect into this, and how can we expect the U.S. to react?
Well, we heard Secretary Blinken saying that this is unacceptable and unwarranted killing of a protester who came to voice, basically to protest against Israeli activity. Now, as far as the investigation is concerned, I think we shouldn't expect any substantial differences in the final investigation in regards to what we saw now. I think this echoes a lot, and also Secretary Blinken alluded to this. This is the second American citizen who has been killed by Israeli forces in the West Bank in recent years. The previous one was Al Jazeera journalist Shirin Abu Akleh, and the conclusions of the probe that was conducted by the IDF were very similar to what we're seeing now in terms of the demand by the Biden administration, or voiced by Blinken, to reassess rules of engagement, how the IDF operates there. We heard that also after Abu Akleh's killing. Nothing really changed on the ground, and it's hard to imagine what can actually change on the ground in these two instances. At the end of the day, we're talking about a journalist and a protester, an activist who willingly put themselves in an active war zone, and so that also needs to be taken into consideration when judging the outcome of this unfortunate situation.
Is there anything that you just kind of want to add to that in terms of Israel's handling of this situation and, you know, what it needs to do also just to kind of remedy relations with the U.S.? Quick answer on this.
So we heard the result of the IDF review. This was an operational review. This is now going into the domain of the military advocate general and the military police. It's tragic. It is terrible whenever a life is lost. But as Ariel just said, this is a chaotic and violent conflict zone, and it was an operational mistake. That's what emerges from this investigation, and it's a very, very tragic incident.
All right, well, returning to Iran now. Iran seems to be licking its wounds. The Islamic Republic has held at least 13 missile launch tests in the month of August alone, and what appears to be preparation for a potential response to the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh back in Tehran in the end of July. Well, Iran has attributed the killing to Israel and has vowed to hit back, but the last time that the Islamic Republic launched a major attack on Israel in April of this year, it proved to be largely unsuccessful, which is why the Islamic Republic has now embarked on a process to understand what went wrong and how to, quote, remedy it. Joining us now is Jason Brodsky. He's the policy director of the organization United Against Nuclear Iran. So let's begin with just talking about these test missile launches. What is Iran attributing to its failed attack against Israel back in April of 2023? What does it believe caused this failure?
It's great to be with you. I think a number of factors caused the failure. First and foremost is the heroic defense that the United States and its allies undertook of Israel in April. Also, let's not forget that there may have been covert sabotage, as some of those reports that you mentioned have indicated, of Iranian missiles that were fired and but did not wound up striking Israel and really never got off the ground because of this is a well-worn program that the United States and its allies have employed in the past to try to thwart Iranian missile launches. And so it does make sense from an Iranian perspective for them to try to engage in a lessons learned exercise to not only focus on the quantity of missiles and drones that it's firing, but most importantly from their perspective is the precision and the quality of the strikes. And so I think that that's what they have been considering as they deliberate over how to retaliate for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran.
Now, what do these test launches essentially reveal about the kind of attack that Israel could expect from Iran in the coming days, weeks, months, or whenever it is going to take place?
It may not be an attack that's similar to what happened in April. In fact, many Iranian officials have been taking to the airwaves suggesting that it could be different this time. Iran has a lot of options to retaliate against Israel. It could do so in the mold of an Operation True Promise in April. It could do so by ramping up its nuclear program. It could do so in the maritime sector with maritime provocations. Let's not also forget the Islamic Republic has a very well-established network of criminal syndicates in Europe and proxies that it uses to surveil and foment terrorism against Israeli and Jewish targets in Europe. So those are many options that the Islamic Republic has to retaliate, and it may not be that kind of strike that we saw in April.
Now, the European Union came out saying that there is evidence that Iran has been essentially giving ballistic missiles to Russia. Certainly doesn't seem like a shocker that Iran would be supplying weapons to Russia, which is certainly no friend to the West. But why is this making such big news, and what kind of impact could it have?
Well, I think it's a failure of deterrence. Despite all the warnings from the United States and Europe that Tehran should not undertake this step because it would be met with very significant consequences, it did so. And that's telling because the Iranian leadership likely feels it could get away with the kind of behavior that it is engaged in. And thus far, today, the United States levied a slate of sanctions, which were very symbolic in many respects. They targeted individuals and entities that have no assets in the West and are unlikely to ever travel to the West as well. So we have that. But I think what Europe is slated to do on Iran Air will be the most significant step. It will sanction Iran Air and terminate bilateral air services agreements that it has with the Islamic Republic. So that does have the potential to make an impact.
All right, Jason, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. We have to go out for a quick commercial break now, but don't go anywhere. We will be back shortly on Middle East Now.
Sale for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayasad.fr.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
In 3, 2, 1. We're off and running. All right. Heat number 2 for the Peeps and Pups.
And we are back on Middle East now. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for sticking with us. Let's turn to the north of Israel. A commander in Hezbollah's elite Radwan force was eliminated in an Israeli airstrike on a motorcycle in the Lebanese town of Sakhbin in the Bekaa Valley today. Now, this strike comes as an unnamed U.S. official is warning of catastrophic consequences if a wider war between Hezbollah and Israel were to erupt. This warning comes amid surprising public statements by the Lebanese government against the terror group. And our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has the details.
A relatively quiet morning along the Israel-Lebanon border turned into a violent afternoon on Tuesday as Hezbollah resumed its launches at Israel, firing dozens of rockets at the western and upper Galilee. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes across Lebanon continued, including a targeted strike eliminating a commander in Hezbollah's elite Radwan force in the town of Sakhbin in the Bekaa Valley. This comes as Israeli authorities instructed residents of northern border communities to remain near shelters, as the return of tens of thousands of Israelis to their homes remains up in the air.
I am impressed by the determination, high professional level, and adherence to the mission that has been going on here for almost a year, both in the north and in the south. The center of gravity is moving north. We are nearing the completion of our tasks in the south, but we have a task here that has not yet been completed, and this task is to change the security situation and return the residents to their homes.
The Israelis must understand that they will not be able to return their northern residents until the war in Gaza has ended. This is definite as far as we're concerned. Hezbollah has succeeded in achieving all its goals on the aid front for Gaza. We are present on the ground, and the threats do not scare us.
Meanwhile, a senior U.S. official warned that a full-blown war between Israel and Hezbollah could have, quote, catastrophic and unforeseen consequences. The Lebanese government is aware of this and issued a surprising public stance.
As the Lebanese government, we want a ceasefire and an end to the war that endangers Lebanon. We have informed the concerned parties of our readiness to engage in indirect negotiations with the Israelis for that end.
The statement was received with doubt in Lebanon as the current government is seen as submissive to Hezbollah.
Israel is the one refusing to stop the war. It's possible that Hezbollah will also refuse, but it is not a state to say yes or no on such matters. The Lebanese state is the one that says yes or no in this regard. If there is a good agreement that we can agree to, we will try to convince Hezbollah as well. This is the responsibility of the Lebanese state.
Even if the Lebanese minister's comments have no real clout, it's a clear signal to Hezbollah. The Lebanese people do not want a war with Israel. Nonetheless, reciprocal strikes will continue, threatening to plunge both countries into a wider war.
We're going to turn now to our correspondent, Balir Sladin, who is joining us from the north of Israel. Balir, so we saw a heavy day of rocket fire start out kind of quiet, but what is the latest right now?
The past hour, apparently drone attack by Hezbollah toward a military target in Amiad, which is about 20-25 kilometers from the border, something that is very deep inside the Israeli territory, of course. And apparently the drone wasn't intercepted because it stayed in the air for several minutes, according to reports from that area. It's not clear whether there was any damage, but Hezbollah, when they issued their statement about this attack, they didn't say that the target was successfully hit. They just said that they have targeted that military site beside Amiad, but the incident here is, of course, very dangerous to the people there in Amiad and Rosh Pina, two big cities and towns that haven't been evacuated, with several thousands of Israelis still live in them, and several also people that evacuated from the border, the towns that are closer to the border are staying in that area as well. And we're hearing the sirens there. Again, rarely happens, but something that, of course, is coming after this escalation today with Israeli Air Force targeting in Nabatia. At least 8 people were wounded in an attack in an apartment in that town in southern Lebanon. Maybe we're talking about a command center that belongs to Hezbollah. And, of course, the assassination in Beqa earlier this morning. That's why we're seeing this escalation from Hezbollah today. That is also, by the way, the 40th day after the killing of their top commander, Fuad Shukr, a couple of months ago.
All right, Balir, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us from the north of Israel with that update. We're going to turn back to our guest in the studio, Yaakov Lapid, military and strategic analyst. I'd like to get your take on, the movement of troops that we are now seeing, or at least hearing that the IDF is preparing for from the Gaza Strip to the north. What does this say about Israel's military strategy at this point?
So as we were talking about at the beginning part of this broadcast, the IDF has been gradually, as it downgrades the intensity of operations in the Gaza Strip, shifting in a very sort of gradual manner forces, infantry, armored corps, and every other kind of unit that you can imagine in the ground forces up to the northern Lebanese border. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant actually said this publicly. I think it was this morning, where he said that our center of gravity, our focus, is moving from south to north. And what he means by that is that quite literally and physically, forces are moving from the southern front to the northern. And while they arrive at the northern front, they have to train. They have to preserve some of their operational lessons. A lot of these units are now battle-hardened. They've gained months of combat experience against Hamas. So that is to be preserved, but they have to kind of forget some of their lessons as well, because the Lebanese arena is very, very different from the urban warfare, the crowded urban warfare that Gaza entails. So that force buildup is very much happening. It's happening publicly. I don't think this is going to be what deters Hezbollah necessarily, but Hezbollah will be looking at this and saying, okay, Israel has a high degree of readiness. At some point, they're going to send these forces over the border. Does the Shiite Iranian axis want to reach that point or not, even before any kind of ceasefire in Gaza, which may never be declared, by the way, is reached? So they have their dilemmas. The Israeli cabinet has its own dilemmas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, it's certainly sending a message that there's only so long that Israel is going to allow Hezbollah to remain so close to the Israeli border. But we're going to turn to Jordan now. Jordan is heading to the polls today for parliamentary elections, but voter dissatisfaction is running high. The ongoing war in Gaza and concerns over Jordan's declining economy, particularly in tourism, have dominated the political climate. And while recent parliamentary reform is aimed at modernizing the system, many Jordanians are skeptical about its impact. Take a look.
Jordanians are casting their votes in the country's first parliamentary election since a reform was passed in 2022. The reform was intended to modernize the political system by increasing the number of parliamentary seats for women and lowering the minimum age for candidates. But the war in Gaza has largely overshadowed these changes. Many Jordanians, half of whom are of Palestinian descent, are angered by Israel's military actions in the Strip. Protests have erupted across Jordan in response to the war, with some demonstrators calling for an end to Jordan's peace treaty with Israel, signed in 1994. Just 2 days before the election, a Jordanian man killed 3 Israelis at the border crossing between Jordan and the West Bank. Candidates include tribal leaders, leftists, centrists, and Islamists from the country's largest opposition group, the Muslim Brotherhood-affiliated Islamic Action Front. The latter are attempting to capitalize on public outrage over Gaza.
Today, what's happening in Gaza is an unprecedented battle, and neither the Jordanian nor Islamic movement can be bystanders. We believe this is an existential battle, not just a normal conflict. The voice of the Jordanian street has been influential in shaping political directions regarding this war.
In addition to concerns over Gaza, Jordan's struggling economy is also on voters' minds. Since the conflict began, the country's tourism industry, a key pillar of its economy, has suffered a sharp decline, adding to the financial hardship many Jordanians are already facing.
The situation here, frankly, is going from bad to worse in terms of job opportunities, which are very basic. And wages are low with long working hours of up to 9 or 10 hours. There are problems in the education and health sectors, and there are problems on the economic side too.
Jordan has a bicameral parliament consisting of the Senate, appointed by the king, and an elected lower chamber known as the House of Representatives, with 138 seats. In July, Jordanian King Abdullah II dissolved the country's lower house of parliament ahead of new elections. Despite the reforms that sought to give a more modern face to Jordan's parliament, many citizens remain skeptical about their effectiveness. There is a widespread belief that the lower house of parliament is filled with pro-government deputies who are unable to bring about meaningful change.
Well, joining us now is journalist and Middle East commentator Daoud. We are turning actually back to the studio right now. It looks like our guest is going to be joining us shortly. All right, so we saw Jordanian elections beginning to take place. A lot of frustration right now from voters as to the ongoing economic situation there. And obviously, you know, the terrorist attack that we saw at the Allenby crossing just a couple of days ago has, you could say, brought about a lot of question marks as to the future of Israeli-Jordanian relations, especially when it comes to security coordination. How is Israel planning to deal with this issue moving forward?
So, you know, Jordan is one of those countries where there are really just two contrasting realities unfolding at the same time. The general population is extremely hostile to Israel. The fact that around 60% of it is Palestinian Jordanian doesn't exactly help. And, you know, there's sort of constant cries for a cancellation of the peace treaty. The Muslim Brotherhood is very active. And also the Iranians are trying to work together with the Muslim Brotherhood, Shiite Sunni radical collaboration here, to try and get weapons through Jordan and into the West Bank. This has been going on for several months. Right. On the other hand, you've got the Hashemite Kingdom and the security forces who completely recognize that Israel and Jordan face the same enemies: Iran, Hamas, the Islamists. Cooperate at the security level, cooperate at the water and energy level. The Emiratis brokered a deal, which was, I think, in May renewed, in which Israel sends a significant amount of water to Jordan. Jordan provides solar-powered electricity. So there's cooperation at multiple levels between the states, but not between the peoples. And this terrorist attack certainly, you know, helps uncover that massive gap, which certainly threatens the stability of Jordan. Israel's interest is for Jordan to be stable because it actually acts as a kind of flak jacket separating Israel from the Shiite axis to the east. And Israel is going to be managing that carefully, I think, going forward.
Well, what could these elections essentially mean for the future of relations between Jordan and the State of Israel, especially amid the mass public outcry and anger towards the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip?
Right. Well, look, I think that, you know, first of all, you know, Jordan is not a full-flung democracy. You know, the Hashemite Kingdom is going to remain in power. King Abdullah II is going to be the sovereign of Jordan, whatever these election results bring. I'm sure that they are worried, the Hashemite Kingdom, about really the Islamists who are currently trying to use the ballot and the political system to increase their influence, but also there's a threat here of terrorism. And Jordan itself, by the way, has been targeted by jihadist terrorism. And we know, you know, if that wasn't enough, that the Iranians are trying to use their Captagon smuggling networks from Syria, as well as weapons smuggling routes from Iraq, to try and infiltrate Jordan continuously. So it's facing multiple threats. These elections are probably some kind of pressure release valve that the Hashemite Kingdom has set up to try and, you know, release some of the pressure on it for maintaining peace with Israel, as well as a host of other internal domestic Jordanian issues, which I'm not necessarily the person to get into that. But from an Israeli perspective, again, the stability of the kingdom is a security interest, as is cooperation with the kingdom.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, military and strategic affairs analyst Yaakov Lapin in studio. We are turning now to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has reopened an embassy in Syria for the first time in over a decade, and this comes after 12 years of severed ties following the start of the Syrian civil war, when Saudi Arabia began sending weapons to opposition forces against President Bashar al-Assad's government, while Iran continued sending arms to the Syrian regime and its allied forces. Well, now it seems that both Syria and Saudi Arabia are seeking to restore bilateral relations. And joining us to further discuss from the UAE is our correspondent, Bastien Boré. So, Bastien, why is this happening right now? What has made both sides decide to try and mend ties?
Well, it's a bit of a paradoxical event, this reopening of this embassy, because on the one hand, Syria as such is no longer a priority for Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, who no longer consider the spread of armed groups in Syria as a major threat, as was the case 10 years ago, for instance. Today, the aim of this normalization with Syria, desired by Saudi Arabia, is above all to weaken Iran, and that's what's at stake here. Iran still has a tremendous influence in Syrian territory. It is known to be considerable, whether on political, religious, military, or even humanitarian level. But while this Iranian influence may have benefited the Assad regime, in the end, it did not benefit the Syrian economy at all. And this economy is sorely lacking in investment today. So the Saudis and other Arab countries, especially Arab countries from the Gulf, reintegrated Syria into the Arab League last year, and they are going to offer Damascus tens of billions of dollars in the coming months and years for the country's reconstruction, development, the reopening of its economy, its tourism, and so on and so forth. And this is something that the Iranians are precisely not in a position to offer, since it is in their interest to take advantage of a weak Syria to advance their pawns, notably against Israel.
How, is this going to impact Saudi Arabia's ties with the West, the closening of relations between Saudi Arabia and Syria? In June of 2023, it was reported that U.S. legislators were mulling tightening sanctions on Syria in a bid to kind of undermine efforts that have been made to reconcile relations with numerous other Arab states.
Well, first, let's talk about the Iranians, because their reaction is pretty interesting, and it has an impact it will have an impact on the Saudi-West relation. The Iranians are trying to judge whether or not they are capable of torpedoing this reconciliation between Riyadh and Damascus. What may work in Tehran's favor is that Syria's return to the fold of the Arab world will take time. After banning Bashar al-Assad and his country, the Arab League needs to reestablish sufficient contacts, bridges, trust, and incentives towards Syria. And this is actually where it may be in Saudi Arabia's interest to encourage Israel and the United States to continue their strikes against Iranian interests in Syria, because as long as these strikes target Iranian military sites and not the Syrian economy, of course, they sort of helped the Saudis. So as a result, the US and Europe may actually accept this Saudi plan and review their moral demands with regards to Bashar al-Assad, whose regime will remain, and this is, of course, an unfortunate consequence, very authoritarian. Of course, in theory, the Americans and the Europeans will continue to think that Assad is a persona non grata. In theory, they will want to maintain the sanctions in place against any country and company trading with Syria. But in practice, this will be impossible, since it would mean sanctioning almost all the countries of the Arab League who just reconciled with Damascus, including Saudi Arabia. And the West wouldn't be able to sustain such a policy. So yes, just to finish, it may well be that the West will half-heartedly accept Syria's active return to Middle East diplomacy thanks to Saudi Arabia.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, Bastian, with that update. We're turning now to Tel Aviv. The families of the Israeli hostages in Gaza are lashing out at the government for failing to keep their loved ones safe. We're turning to Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, where our correspondent Emily Francis joins us live. Now, Emily, there have been a lot of stories coming out over the course of the last 24 hours, a lot of anger that we're seeing from the families of hostages. The mother of former hostage Sergeant Ron Sherman saying that the IDF didn't inform her of reports that her son was allegedly killed in an Israeli airstrike. We are hearing about the mother.
The signal is very, very loud here. I hope that you can hear me. But as you can see, despite everything and all the efforts to make a hostage deal, people are still coming out in droves here to the Kiryat. Natasha, we've moved from Hostage Square, where there is an event planned, to come here to the Kiryat, the IDF headquarters, because people are still, we're more than a week into nightly protests. If you take a look, people are not giving up the push to call on the government to do whatever is possible to make a hostage deal. As you can see, they've closed off the street here. We're in between the Azrieli Center and the IDF hostage headquarters. As you can see, it's very loud. But again, people are continuing to have the momentum to do whatever it takes to call on the government to do something to bring the remaining hostages home. Especially, you want to add the anger people feel about the circumstances of the killing of the 6 hostages more than a week ago, with information coming out and being reported about the conditions in which they survived. The will to survive more than 10 months in an 80-centimeter tunnel with no food, no fresh air, no showers, no anything. Also revealing that they were trying to defend themselves and fighting to the very end against the Hamas captors. Also defending and supporting each other. So very, very deep and very chilling information that has at least come out according to reports. So with that said, this is why people are continuing to gather on a nightly basis here in the Kiryat to demand answers, to demand a deal, and to do whatever is possible to bring the hostages home so this country can move forward and move on.
All right, Emily Francis joining us from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. Obviously, it has been a very difficult couple of days for the families of the hostages following the news that she just mentioned, but obviously it's now been almost a year since over 250 Israelis and civilians were taken hostage by Hamas, and 101 of them still remain in captivity. All right, we're turning to a very different story here. It's an important step forward that has been made. The Israeli Health Ministry says that it has launched its first ever suicide prevention campaign targeting men. 78% of all people who die by suicide in Israel each year are men. That's according to the ministry's data. And it aligns with the statistics that the World Health Organization also reports. Well, as the Israel-Hamas war continues to rage, this campaign is perhaps more essential than ever. And joining us now, Ziv Cohen. He's a forensic psychiatrist at the Cornell University Medical Center. So first of all, give us a sense of the numbers in terms of the people who commit suicide in Israel every year and how that has changed since the start of the war.
Well, actually, so interestingly, we did see some data that suicide rates have not increased in Israel since October 7th. The number of suicides in Israel is about 500 a year, and as far as we can tell, it's been obviously less than a year since October 7th, but that number has not increased. But I think that the Ministry of Health is pointing out that there has not been a systematic effort towards suicide prevention by the Ministry of Health in Israel and by the government authorities, and they're really trying to catch up with what has been shown to be the best practice in other first world countries in terms of having a national suicide prevention plan.
Tell us.
And the issue with men, of course, is that men have higher suicide completion rates than women. So women attempt suicide more frequently than men, but when men attempt suicide, they're much more likely to succeed. And one of the reasons is that they tend to use firearms, whereas women tend not to use firearms. And if you use a firearm, you're more likely to succeed. So the fact that Israel has most suicides, completed suicides in Israel are men rather than women. And that's true also in the United States.
You know, tell us how many men are at risk in Israel today and how the war specifically has impacted those numbers.
Well, I think that whenever there's stress on society, we do worry that we're going to see an increase in suicide rates. You know, for example, in the United States, when we saw the Great Recession, we had a dramatic increase in suicide rates, particularly in middle-aged males. So again, we are looking to see whether there's going to be a bump in rates in Israel. Fortunately, we haven't seen it yet, but I think that in terms of the stress on men, of course, we're thinking about the reservists. We're thinking about the conscript soldiers, people who are removed from their homes, from their safety nets, from their support networks, and going out to the front and fighting for extended periods. That's putting people under a lot of stress. We do know that combat trauma is associated with higher suicide rates. And what we often have seen, for example, in the United States, is that there's a delayed effect. So when the U.S. launched the second Iraq war, there'd be a delayed effect of a year or two before you start to see the spike in suicide rates amongst soldiers and veterans. So I think that the concern is that, what are going to be the ripple effects of this prolonged period war footing that Israel is in, and that also there's no end in sight to it. So I think that this campaign is really needed right now to hopefully prevent a ripple effect from this prolonged war.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Very important topic. Obviously, there needs to be more of an effort to encourage men to talk about their distress, not only in the state of Israel, but around the world. So obviously, this campaign is coming at a very, very essential time. Ziv Cohen, I'd like to, again, thank you for joining us and talking about this pressing issue.
Good to be here.
All right. Well, that is it for now from Middle East Now. We're going to be back again tomorrow, so make sure to tune in at 7 p.m. I'm Natasha Kirchak, and we're going to be turning to the rundown now shortly, so don't go anywhere. We'll be back on I-24 News soon.
Sale for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayasad.fr.
Made U.S. calls the fatal shooting of an American-Turkish protester by Israeli forces unprovoked and unjustified and calls on the IDF to change its rules of engagement in the West Bank. We'll take a closer look. Defense Minister Gallant says Hamas is finished as a military force as the IDF strikes at one of the terror group's command centers in a Gaza safe zone. We'll have the latest. A new documentary exposing footage from the police interrogation of Benjamin Netanyahu on corruption charges debuts at the Toronto Film Festival. The fight despite the Prime Minister's efforts to stop it. We'll have that story. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. The fatal shooting of a dual Turkish-American citizen by IDF troops at a protest last week in the West Bank is drawing harsh criticism today from the U.S., opening new fault lines between Israel and the Biden administration. 26-year-old Aysanur Ezgi Aygi, born in Turkey and raised in Seattle, Washington, was killed when soldiers opened fire in a clash with Palestinian demonstrators against the building of an Israeli settlement near the village of Beta. After an initial inquiry, the IDF released this statement today, saying the inquiry found that it is highly likely that she was hit indirectly and unintentionally by IDF fire, which was not aimed at her, but aimed at the key instigator of the riot. The incident took place during a violent riot in which dozens of Palestinian suspects burned tires and hurled rocks towards security forces at the Beta Junction. At the same time, though, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had this to say, speaking to reporters in a press briefing with the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
I think what we saw of this investigation is it seems to show what eyewitnesses have said and made clear, that her killing was both unprovoked and unjustified. No one should be shot and killed for attending a protest. No one should have to put their life at risk just for freely expressing their views. In our judgment, Israeli security forces need to make some fundamental changes in the way that they operate in the West Bank, including changes to their rules of engagement.
And joining us in the studio for more, Reserves IDF Major General Eitan Dangot, the former military secretary to 3 defense ministers, former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran. We should note, Eitan, that Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, is going to give a briefing this evening. He may address those remarks or this incident. We know also that he is going to show footage never released until now of the tunnel in which those 6 hostages found dead were discovered in Gaza last week, and we'll go to that when he comes. But let's start with this incident. That's pretty harsh criticism coming from a U.S. Secretary of State at a time when the IDF is trying to get a grip on the security situation in the West Bank, keeping it from exploding while it's so engaged, for example, in Gaza and up north in Lebanon against Hezbollah.
Yes. First of all, we are very sorry for what happened, of course, in the case in the West Bank on this activity while the woman has been shot by IDF. But we have to understand that besides, of course, with all taking into account the way of uninvolvement people, you are active in unacceptable area while many people are around you and press and everywhere. And above all, you have the terrorists with their charges, with their new weapon. The West Bank is not bubbling. In the West Bank, we are under, we can call it a war as another arena that has started and increasing its activities in terrorism. And the weight that are on the shoulders of the soldiers and the commanders is not so easy. The West Bank is active with terrorism in the north part, under 4 main cities, in the area in Hebron on the south, and also in the Jordan Valley. And for it, you have to be very offensively active inside these places. You have till now a lot of achievements by succeeding to kill or to stop terrorists in their places by getting a very direct intelligence, by planning how and to do it without killing or wounded people that are not involving. And what happened here was, unfortunately, in my opinion, a case that you have to study from it, you have to take your conclusions, but the war will continue. And I hope it's the last case that can be in such a war. But as you know, even the American can tell us what happened during a war. In other places, their armies were active. The IDF, the army, is working very specifically in these places. And in my opinion, we are in a very sensitive step now that will impact all the regional war, because if West Bank is continuing with its process to climbing up, you have to bring there much more forces, and you have to calculate your step from Gaza to the north or from Gaza to the West Bank. And in my opinion, we are on the way to the West Bank as the important and the urgent place we are active.
All right, Ariel, we're getting the big picture from Eitan, and he's right, it is part of a bigger picture. But at the same time, all of what he's talking about here in dealing with these threats, and regionally perhaps, is dependent in somewhat on cooperation between Israel and the United States. And Israel has to take into account the sensitivities when an American citizen is shot dead under whatever, these circumstances are still under investigation. That was an initial inquiry by the IDF.
Look, any uninvolved death, especially of an activist, is tragic, and this is something that requires further investigation from the IDF. But in his remarks, Secretary Blinken said that this was the second incident of an American citizen killed by IDF forces in recent years. The previous one was Shireen Abu Akleh, the Al Jazeera journalist who was killed before the war. That was about 2 years ago. She was killed unintentionally, also in Jenin by IDF fire. And also then we heard similar statements coming out from Blinken and the Biden, the Biden administration, saying that they need to re-examine the rules of engagement and how Israel operates there. Look, in both cases, this is an active war zone with an active IDF operation ongoing. And so it is very difficult, or perhaps even impossible, to expect the IDF to change its rules of engagement under those circumstances. And I think the fact that they haven't changed following the previous incident, I doubt it will change following this, as tragic and sad as this specific event.
I agree with you, because the security situation hasn't changed, but what has changed is the political environment in the United States, and that's why there may be some noise about this from some time to come. But let's move on, because, of course, Eitan, you talked about the bigger picture, the multiple fronts Israel is engaged in now. And it may be that the center of gravity of Israel's military efforts is moving from Gaza to the north of the country. At least that was the message today from Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. With over 60,000 residents of northern Israel still unable to return to their homes after 10 months, pressure is building on the government to find some answer, military or otherwise, to this situation. This, as a U.S. official says, that a full-on war with Hezbollah that many in the political and security echelons are calling for could be catastrophic for the region. Our Middle East correspondent, Ari Osseron, has more on that in this report.
A relatively quiet morning along the Israel-Lebanon border turned into a violent afternoon on Tuesday as Hezbollah resumed its launches at Israel, firing dozens of rockets at the western and upper Galilee. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes across Lebanon continued, including a targeted strike eliminating a commander in Hezbollah's elite Redwan force in the town of Sarbin in the Bekaa Valley. This comes as Israeli authorities instructed residents of northern border communities to remain near shelters, as the return of tens of thousands of Israelis to their homes remains up in the air.
I am impressed by the determination, high professional level, and adherence to the mission that has been going on here for almost a year, both in the north and in the south. The center of gravity is moving north. We are nearing the completion of our tasks in the south, but we have a task here that has not yet been completed, and this task is to change the security situation and return the residents to their homes.
The Israelis must understand that they will not be able to return their northern residents until the war in Gaza has ended. This is definite as far as we're concerned. Hezbollah has succeeded in achieving all its goals on the aid front for Gaza. We are present on the ground, and the threats do not scare us.
Meanwhile, a senior U.S. official warned that a full-blown war between Israel and Hezbollah could have, quote, catastrophic and unforeseen consequences. The Lebanese government is aware of this and issued a surprising public stance.
As the Lebanese government, we want a ceasefire and an end to the war that endangers Lebanon. We have informed the concerned parties of our readiness to engage in indirect negotiations with the Israelis for that end.
The statement was received with doubt in Lebanon as the current government is seen as submissive to Hezbollah.
Israel is the one refusing to stop the war. It's possible that Hezbollah will also refuse, but it is not a state to say yes or no on such matters. The Lebanese state is the one that says yes or no in this regard. If there is a good agreement that we can agree to, we will try to convince Hezbollah as well. This is the responsibility of the Lebanese state.
Even if the Lebanese minister's comments have no real clout, it's a clear signal to Hezbollah. The Lebanese people do not want a war with Israel. Nonetheless, reciprocal strikes will continue, threatening to plunge both countries into a wider war.
And for more, let's go to our correspondent, Balia Sladin, there in northern Israel. And Balia, like Ariel said, the day started relatively quiet, but things unfortunately have picked up going into the evening. What's the situation now?
Yes, exactly. Hezbollah started the attacks in the afternoon today after the series of attacks that the IDF has carried this noon or this morning, of course, including the one targeted assassination in Bekaa. And Hezbollah retaliated for that. That's according to their statements. And they have targeted, apparently in the past hour, the military site or a military base beside Amiad, which is 25 kilometers from the border. Of course, a situation where a drone was actually flying over Rosh Pina, over Amiad, to northern communities with thousands of civilians that haven't been evacuated, including some of the civilians that have been evacuated from other areas, from Kiryat Shmone, from the communities that are right on the border. And they're seeing a drone maybe for several minutes even above their heads. Apparently that drone exploded and there were no casualties as a result of it. That's what the Home Front Central Command saying, that the incident already finished or has been finished. And that's again a reminder that the current situation in the north is something that is not acceptable for the population here. And of course what we're hearing from the Defense Minister Gallant talking after or talking to some soldiers, saying that the center of gravity is now moving to the north after the completion of the missions in the south is nearing, because of this situation, because of what we've heard also from the Prime Minister earlier this week, saying that he ordered the military to prepare for changing the situation, meaning to change the situation to a situation where the population here can go back to their homes safely. Now, also today, after that targeted assassination, the IDF has targeted an apartment in Batia. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, at least 8 people were wounded in that attack. It's not clear. They are saying that they are civilians. The Israeli reports are saying that that's a command center in that area. Basically, most of the south of Lebanon and the many southern cities and towns in the south, of course, are very close to Hezbollah, and they operate inside the populated areas there. We've seen that several times, and that's why the Israeli Air Force is targeting there. And by the way, we're talking in the 40th day, after the killing of Fuad Shukr, the top commander of Hezbollah, and they are also carrying a ceremony in Beirut because of this 40 days reminder of, of course, this Islamic practice after 40 days of someone that has died. Of course, he was killed, to hold this ceremony, and we've heard a lot of chants, of course, against Israel, saying that in any way we will continue our fight. That's the understanding here in Israel. That's the understanding also in the U.S. that as long as the war continues in Gaza, Hezbollah won't stop firing their rockets.
All right,
and drones.
Balia, where Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, has started his briefing. Let's go to that.
In recent days, we have shown to the families of Hirsch, Eden, Carmel, Alex, Almog, and Ori of blessed memory. We presented documentation from the tunnel in Rafah, where we located them. This evening, we will broadcast the documentation here. We will go down to the tunnel in which we found the 6 hostages who were killed, and we will film inside the tunnel. The house here, where this children's bedroom was closed, we opened up the floor under the children's bedroom, and we saw this opening to the tunnel. This is a characteristic that we find very often in Gaza, where shafts are dug in places where people won't get to, like children's bedrooms, and it happened here too. The ladders were built by Hamas. What they were meant to do was to have a hidden shaft that will be opened from here if need be, to break the floor and to be able to emerge from the children's bedroom outside. The shaft goes down underground, 20 meters deep, using 4 separate ladders. From there, it connects to a low and narrow tunnel with no rooms that is about 120 meters long, at the end of which is a blocked iron door. In this part of the tunnel, the 6 hostages were held and killed. We are here in the tunnel. We have gone down 20 meters underground. I am here together with the Eitan team. It's a forensics team that has already collected evidence from the scene, and still we are working on canvassing the area, which is why we'll be doing this very cautiously. We're going to abide by the team's instructions, but we must document this in the closest way as we found it. This is a passage tunnel. It's not a room tunnel. It's a tunnel that you can't stand up straight in. You can't stand up straight with your back straight. It's very humid here. It's very difficult to live. And I want you to see what we found here. You can see here already bottles of urine that were stored here, probably a sort of toilet where the hostages were held. This is a sort of absorption hole, a place where you do your...
Pretty clear. Yeah.
You go to the toilet. This is women's stuff, women's hygiene products. All will be taken from here, all will be documented and recorded. We found a chess set. Everything was just thrown here, scattered. Chess pieces. Here we found terrorist equipment, electric chargers, AK-27 magazines, also the bullets of an AK-27 that may have been used in this atrocious murder. Quran books, headlights, hairbrushes. You will check who used these hairbrushes. This is the point in the tunnel at which the hostages were murdered. You can see their blood on the floor. This is where their last moments were spent. Hirsch, Eden, Carmel, Ori, Almog, and Alex. This is where they were brutally murdered We're going to learn from everything that happened here. We need to learn a lot from what has happened here. It is very difficult to survive here. They were heroes. Heroes who were murdered in cold blood by murderous terrorists that build tunnels underneath children's bedrooms and hide in them together with hostages, who chose to kill the hostages and to try and escape from here. We will chase them. We will find the intelligence and know exactly. We will reach those who murdered them. Now, the Eitan forensic teams are collecting and gathering all the evidence from the scene. We will not leave a single piece of evidence behind. First of all, everything that needs to be brought back to the families will be brought back to the families. We will collect all the intelligence in order to persecute these terrorists that we'll be able to tell the families. All the findings that you saw in the tunnel were taken for investigation and examination. We are looking into these materials and we are exhausting every lead in order to find these terrorists who are responsible for this atrocious murder. We will continue to fight Hamas determinedly and kill the commanders and terrorists wherever they are. We have distributed this documentation in English as well, and I have instructed the international media so that the entire world will see and remember the evil of Hamas and know how it conducts itself brutally with hostages. At the same time, we're also continuing to investigate the circumstances of the murder, and when this investigation will be complete, we'll present it first and foremost to the families and only then to the public. The forces who are operating on the ground did so very responsibly and very cautiously above and below ground. They have eliminated in recent weeks many terrorists above ground, among them the Tel El Sultan commander and other members of the command. We did not have the intelligence in order to get these hostages out of the tunnel. We did not know their exact location in the tunnel we now found. They were murdered before we reached them. We are also investigating the leaking of the names of the hostages on Saturday before they were taken out of the tunnel. This is a very serious matter that was very hurtful to the hostages' families, but it was also hurtful to the safety of the forces on the ground. And now, too, our hearts are first and foremost with the families of the hostages, and we share the pain and the fact that they have lost their loved ones. We will continue to take every action, make every effort in order to bring back the hostages alive and as quickly as possible. At the same time as we continue fighting in Gaza, we also continue to take actions very intensely in the northern border. This morning, we struck Hezbollah targets. We targeted Hezbollah HQ and also a site where missiles are manufactured. We also killed a commander in the Radwan force. We continue to be very intense in our actions. We have plans, and we will continue to work under the political echelon's instructions. Any questions? Kan 11 and Kan Reshet Bet. Following this incident, has the IDF stopped sending forces into tunnels with the understanding that you cannot determine exactly whether there are hostages there? And the second question, yesterday we published recordings where the Prime Minister's wife goes against the IDF officials. What do you want to say about that? First of all, I'm a uniform-wearing officer, so I will not be addressing this question. As for your question about the tunnels, we are taking action, we'll continue to take action in tunnels. The reality in Gaza is very complex, and it is our duty to be responsible in our actions. We will learn our lessons from this incident, and we will continue to take action accordingly. Yoav Evin, Channel 12 News. The IDF operate near the tunnel in Rafah near the time of the murder, and have you found any connection between the release of Farhan and the decision to kill the hostages because they were worried that they'd be released? Farhan was located about 700 meters away from the point where we found the hostages. From his investigation on the ground, we found no findings about the 6 hostages. We will continue to take action in this area very cautiously, very responsibly. We continue to investigate and take action as well as eliminate terrorists wherever we come across them. Liran Weinstein Srugim, good evening. After the IDF left Tulkarm, Jenin, and Nablus, we saw funerals of terrorists. We saw them firing in the air. Why do we continue these surgical actions instead of just killing entire battalions of terrorists? We are taking decisive action determinedly every single day, around the clock, against terrorism in Judea and Samaria. Our actions prove that. We have results to show for it, and we will continue to do so around the clock. We will kill the terrorists that are active in Judea and Samaria. I-24, just hours after the Minister of Defense Gallant said that the center of gravity will be shifted to the north. We see drones, we see rockets. When will we see change? This is no time for declarations. Every single day we take actions against Hezbollah. We eliminate terrorists, we eliminate commanders, we strike their capabilities, and we will continue to do so determinedly. At the same time, and in addition to that, we have operational plans being prepared, and we will put them to action when we are being instructed by the political echelon. Can you confirm that there is no information that Sinwar will actually use the Philadelphia corridor to smuggle hostages? Do you have any intention of bringing the hostages back home safely through operations? I don't know any information of the kind that you have mentioned about Sinwar smuggling hostages through the Philadelphia corridor. What was the second question, please? Do you have any strategy about how to make sure the hostages remain alive? Well, about the strategy about the hostages, it's something that is being discussed with the political echelon. It's something that where the decisions that will be made by the political echelon will be carried out. Channel 13 News. Following this video, we now have new information about how the hostages are held, the conditions they're held in. Well, these conditions on the ground are very, very hard, and we know that additional hostages are being held under similar conditions or worse. Israel today, does the IDF believe that the hostages are all underground under similar conditions? As I've said, we collect intelligence about the hostages. We know that there are more hostages who are being held in similar conditions, but we're not going to expose any other intelligence. Thank you very much.
And we just heard, of course, the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, present that, I have to say, shocking and difficult to watch footage of the conditions in which those 6 hostages were held for months on end. And I have to say, watching that footage, I come away with 2 reactions. One is that you can understand those who say Hamas must be hunted down and destroyed. To hold people in those conditions for months on end is inhuman, and those who committed this crime have to pay. On the other hand, this is the condition hostages currently are in, we assume, some of the other hostages. And of course, you have to think about what they're experiencing and what sacrifices might have to be taken to get them out as soon as possible.
There is no doubt that, in my opinion, the circumstances that we are in today, and we had to do it a few months ago already, in the places where we have the opportunities, we had to release and bring them home to give them to live again, because what happened to them as the civilians of the Israeli state is duty from us to, first of all, to bring them back home. The Hamas will not disappear. Unfortunately, these murderers will be for years, and it continues. What is important, after what we saw, you know, it reminds us the condition in the Holocaust, of course. For each one of them, he passed Holocaust. And what is deployed all over now, the Gaza Strip, we don't know exactly where they are, how they are holding.
How many are alive?
And how many are alive, and we have to bring them home as soon as possible. I think that this goal from the Israeli cabinet, the Israeli prime minister, supporting by the majority of the Israeli state, is first of all to fill the duty and the unsigned contract that was clear to any Israeli civilian. When I am in any problem, the state of Israel will be here for me. And unfortunately, the state of Israel are not for them till now, while they were taken from their beds, while they are 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers from the border. And I think that even now on the second floor, the military achievements till now bring opportunities to the decision makers. Even Sinwar is against this deal. You have to do what you can to bring them home. No doubt, to bring them home is the first important value. Secondly, Caleb, if they are coming back, I think all the picture of the strategic situation around us can be changed to other kind of steps.
All right, I'll come to it in a minute, but I do want to go to our Emily Francis, who is out there in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. And Emily just saw this shocking footage. Emily, are you with us? Just want to make sure. Emily,
Call again.
All right, is Emily Francis with us? All right, I'm sorry. We just lost connection with Emily there. We'll go back to when we can. Ariel, again, your reaction to that. But also, we should note efforts for a hostage deal are continuing. Secretary Blinken did say earlier today that the U.S. may yet present another of its bridging proposals to try to find some kind of deal between Israel and Hamas. American sources say Hamas is still making demands, a complete end to Israel's campaign against it that are unacceptable. But we do see, as grim as it is, the mediator is still trying to finding ways to find a formula even.
Part of that formula, Kalev, in the third phase is the reconstruction of Gaza. And all those who are going to send money to aid the reconstruction of Gaza, they need to be very concerned that this is what their money is going for, to build these underground tunnels. This wasn't even a tunnel that was built for long period of stay for hostages. There were designated areas for that. This is a transport tunnel and basically an exit from the main tunnel system that we're about to see right now. This is an exit from that main tunnel system that you see on the bottom left part of that screen. And so this was not intended to keep hostages, yet this is where they were kept for between 2 to 3 weeks. According to medical experts who reviewed the bodies, they said that they were in devastating, horrific conditions leading up to that. And this is what the international community needs to be aware of, that what Israel's operation right now to in the tunnels of Gaza, hundreds of miles of tunnels, this is the threat. However, they were executed as the forces were approaching. And this is what the families are saying, that if the paradigm of maximum military pressure is what brings the hostages out, unfortunately, as they say, currently it's what brings them back in body bags. And they want to ensure as much as they can to bring them back alive, and they continue to call for a deal. And that's also what the IDF, by sharing this in all languages, is trying to also put its weight behind a deal.
Well, let's go to one of the hostage families. Emily Francis out in Hostage Square. Emily, shocking footage this evening, but just underscoring the plight of those hostages.
Hi, good evening, Caleb. Listen, I think the footage that released is so chilling. I guess not a surprise that these 6 beautiful souls had to live under such dire, hellish conditions while fighting as best they could to not only protect each other, but to survive. But as you can see, the people of Israel are not giving up the fight to bring home the remaining 101 hostages alive. We're at a protest now in front of the IDF headquarters, and I managed to spot Yehuda Cohen in the crowd, the father of Nimrod Cohen, who is here with us. First of all, how are you holding up and everyone holding up in light of everything that's happened in the past 10 days?
Well, the bad news is we still don't have a deal. Well, the partially good news we have, as you said, everybody here around, we have the people with us. The problem is the government. The government only cares about itself. Netanyahu only cares about itself. That's why he is the main obstacle for a deal.
So to see the Israeli people and all over the world coming here to support you, does it give you and the families a sense of comfort, given that this is a awful thing that you've had to go through for a year?
Yeah, it does give us comfort. I hope they won't give up on us. but we have a very stubborn government that doesn't want the deal. We heard Netanyahu, we heard his wife, we heard them always finding excuses, ridiculous excuses not to go for a deal. The latest one is Hamas murdered 6 hostages. We won't give him a price to go for a deal to release hostages. He's like punishing the Hamas, not releasing the hostages. That sounds very, makes sense.
The information that has just come out about these 6 beautiful, beautiful people that have had to sacrifice their own lives, but to see, the reports that they were fighting to the very end, they were protecting each other. Does that give you any kind of strength to know that your son is young and strong and able to survive under the worst conditions?
Yeah, on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, we see the end, the tragic end of those 6. So I hope my son is not fighting in vain. I hope we will release him. We will force our government to release him. Although our government is practicing psychological terror on us, claiming Hamas is doing so. Although we won't give up, we will keep on fighting. I will keep on fighting until my son Nimrod will be back home with all the rest of the hostages. We won't give up. We won't blink.
Do you have faith that a deal will be made with the help of the Americans trying to close a deal?
I have faith that eventually the U.S., the Israeli public will force a deal on Netanyahu. We hope that. That's the only reason we are still fighting. We are depending on our nation, the Israeli nation, not on our government, and we are depending on the support of the U.S. government and the diaspora.
Yehuda, thank you very much, as always, for your strength, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
So as you can see, we're right here with the father of a hostage. They are still here every night. All of the people here protesting is giving them the strength to continue. And obviously, the Israeli people here are not going to give up hope and not going to stop fighting to bring the remaining 101 hostages home.
All right, Emily Francis, and of course, we want to see Nimrod Cohen and all of the hostages back home safe and sound as soon as possible and in any way possible. Emily, thank you for that. And just a background, Emily's reference to the hostages fighting to the very end, some initial forensic evidence of the victims that they died some of them died in the signs of a struggle before they were killed, showing that even in those terrible, debilitating conditions in which they were kept, at the end they did try to fight back against their Hamas captives. May their memories be a blessing. Let's stay focused on Gaza. Now, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant did tell reporters today that Hamas no longer exists as a military force, and the battle against it now has been reduced basically to guerrilla warfare against scattered terrorists. But however you define it, the fighting in Gaza goes on. Early today, the Israel Defense Forces targeted a Hamas command and control center embedded within the humanitarian zone of Al-Mawasi in Gaza. While Hamas officials initially claimed at least 40 people, mostly civilians, were killed, the Israeli military strongly disputed these numbers, calling them exaggerated. And indeed, Hamas later revised their death toll down to 19. More of that in this report.
At least 40 people were reportedly killed and 60 injured during an Israeli strike on the humanitarian zone of Al-Mawasi near Han Yunis in Gaza in the early hours of Tuesday. These were the initial figures released by the Hamas-controlled Gaza Civil Defense. But the Israel Defense Forces stated that the presented numbers do not match the military's intelligence assessment.
According to the IDF's initial review, the numbers published by the Hamas-run Government Information Office in Gaza, which, by the way, time and time again has consistently broadcast fake news and false information. Sometimes it's called the Data Information Office, sometimes it's called the Civilian Defense Office. Once again, their reports this time, sadly often parroted by many in the media, did not align with the truth.
Gaza's health ministry later updated the death toll, lowering it to 19. According to the IDF, its fighter jets precisely targeted significant Hamas terrorists operating within a command and control center intentionally placed within a civilian area. Among those killed were senior Hamas figures, Samer Ismail Khadr Abu Daqa, head of Hamas's aerial unit, Osama Tabesh, head of the Observation and Targets Department in Hamas's military intelligence, and Ayman Mabhou, another high-ranking Hamas operative. Despite Hamas's claim that none of its operatives were present at the time of the strike, Israel reiterated that terrorist groups in Gaza are known to systematically exploit civilian areas and humanitarian infrastructure to shield their activities. The Israeli military says it took extensive measures to minimize harm to civilians before carrying out the strike. These efforts included using precision munitions and conducting aerial surveillance to ensure that only legitimate military targets were hit. Eyewitnesses reported that at least 4 missiles hit the area, creating large craters and burying at least 20 tents in the sand.
My tent is destroyed. My belongings are gone. I don't know how we can live, and I don't know where to go. Where can we go? Find us a solution. We are under siege, destroyed. Nothing is reaching us. We have no food or water or anything. We are peaceful people. We do not have anything to do with resistance.
Al-Mawasi, a coastal area in southern Gaza, has become a refuge for tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war on October 7th. This is not the first time Israel has had to strike Al-Mawasi in pursuit of Hamas commanders. In mid-July, an Israeli strike targeting Hamas military chief Mohammed Deif resulted in dozens of civilian casualties, a consequence of Hamas's tactic of embedding within civilian populations.
And Eitan, maybe give us a little fuller explanation of Defense Minister Gallant's comment, basically saying Hamas is no longer a military force, because clearly, though, Hamas still has the capability to strike at IDF troops, and even occasionally, unfortunately, we've seen to even still send rockets over into Israel.
Listen, the war is against terror organization that built itself as a terror country. And we saw that they built itself with a lot of arsenal of arms, and also up and especially underground area, which are very complicated, and they did it for at least between 10 to 14 years, the last years. And when you are fighting against such a thing, I think that the first main stage as destroyment of this structure of terror organization that was built like an army, it is an army, has been broken. This is military achievement. The beginning of the war, from the 8th of October, I estimate that it will take almost a year to break its structure. And now we are under guerrilla that till we not find a parallel, another kind of civilian authorities that will be in Gaza, it will take us more and more years in order to break and not let it grow up immediately. So what has brought the IDF now is a lot of military achievements in most of the territory of Gaza. Now I think the IDF is contained and looking forward for its achievements. And really the problem for Israel now is coming from the north border, from Lebanon and Syria together as a one complex that the architect is Iran, and the main proxies is, of course, Hezbollah. And what Gallant means today, that if the government is not going towards release of the kidnapped or our civilians inside Gaza, and it will take time, we have to move our weight from the south to the north, looking what will be in the West Bank. I mentioned it before, because it can be a game changer to everything, while we have in the back Syria, Iraq, and also the Houthis in Yemen as operating their Shiite militias.
Right. It's a big picture. I want to bring it back to Gaza and the paradox the IDF has found itself in fighting with that enemy that contains itself in a civilian population, creating these safe zones like Al-Mawasi. And, of course, that immediately provides a cover Hamas to try to exploit that. And then, of course, when Israel has to make these kind of operations, we see the media reaction and then, of course, reactions of all these NGOs that follow them.
Kalev, we just saw Hamas hides its tunnels where it kills hostages under children's rooms, and it hides its command centers in designated humanitarian zones. Both of those, according to international law, are deemed legitimate targets due to the steps of Hamas. But this is something that the international community, time and time again, chooses to ignore, simply looks at what the images that it's seeing on the surface, and not looking at to what is the meaning of what the images that are being seen on the surface. And this short-sightedness, or even we could say a very simplistic view of the reality that is going on in the ground, which is a very complex reality, as the past half an hour of this show has proven what Israeli forces have to deal with in its activity against Hamas, trying to uproot this terror apparatus embedded deep within, among, and beneath innocent civilian population. I think the international community is not voicing enough condemnation against that, and simply falls into the traps of Hamas that that the humanitarian zone was targeted, and so Israel is carrying out violations. The international community needs to be more responsible when addressing this conflict. Unfortunately, it is continuously remiss in doing so.
Briefly. On the operational side, you might take an account that were a lot of hours while you have a very direct intelligence against those three figures. The cynic way, as was described here, that Hamas is using these areas that were built by Israel, and the special attack, the way of attacking, is to prevent more casualties. And we did it in many places. It's not the first time. And we have the duty to kill them and to destroy this kind of structure that Hamas is trying to rebuild. And it's not a competition. We cannot compete the first news that is coming, lying by Hamas, that double of the people that were died. They said the number was double the time, double the number, and the casualties. Then is coming, yes, we are correcting, or remember, but this is life, this is a war for life or death.
And who says that the corrected number are accurate, because that too is controlled by Hamas.
Of course. And this is the problem when you're dealing with an enemy that is just lying outright, and unfortunately a media that picks up on it too quickly.
Yep.
All right, we're going to move away from the military conflict to something that is more connected with Israel's domestic politics. Now, yesterday, a new documentary by filmmakers Alexis Bloom and Alex Gibney, which features never-before-seen footage of Israeli police interrogating Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his family, and in his inner circle on the corrupt allegations for which the Prime Minister is currently standing trial, was released. The documentary was screened at the 2024 Toronto Film Festival just hours after a petition by Netanyahu to block the screening in Canada was rejected. Jody Notelevitz has that story.
Despite last-ditch efforts to have it blocked, a film about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu premiered Monday night in front of a packed audience at the Toronto Film Festival. Over the last 8 years, Israeli authorities have been looking into allegations of corruption against Netanyahu, and his fight back against the charges have sparked a huge rift in Israel between his supporters and his opponents. The Bibi Files is a 2-hour-long journalistic expose surrounding the corruption, fraud, and breach of trust charges brought against the Prime Minister that resulted in his 2019 indictment. The film is based on leaked footage and interviews with top Israeli officials, including a former prime minister and a Shin Bet director. Produced by Alex Gibney and directed by Alexis Bloom, it features the interrogation tapes of Netanyahu, his wife Sarah, and their son Yair. On Monday morning, the Jerusalem District Court denied Netanyahu's request to remove the movie from the TIFF schedule. In the lawsuit, investigative journalist Raviv Drucker, who produced the documentary, was accused of breaking Israeli law by disclosing the footage.
But it's a law that says that if you're photographed as part of an official proceeding, you have privacy rights. And that footage can't be shown, which makes it a crime to publish that footage because of the privacy rights of individuals. It's a peculiar law to Israel, doesn't affect the rest of the world, and it does threaten the freedom of the source, if the source were ever to be found out.
The Bibi Files is still a work in progress, but it's been 5 years since the charges were brought against Netanyahu, And with the ongoing war in Gaza, Alexis Bloom, the film's director, said, quote, "There's a real sense of urgency here with this war continuing. It's an old-fashioned truth-to-power film, and he's in power." Supporters of the Prime Minister say the charges are judicial and police overreach, intended to remove Netanyahu from power by undemocratic means.
Yeah, unlikely that film was going to, the Israeli Supreme Court was going to be able to stop the screening of a film in Toronto, and this seems more of a symbolic gesture by the Prime Minister in this case. Well, let's move now to the United States, because tonight is the night that Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris finally squares off face-to-face in debate with the Republican tender, former President Donald Trump. Now, the showdown in Philadelphia kicks off at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and with most polls showing this race in a dead heat at this point, this debate is seen as especially crucial in the race for the White House. Now, support for Israel's war against Hamas has emerged as a much-discussed issue, at least in this election cycle, and one would expect it will be tackled in some way in tonight's debate. Well, for more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, there in Washington. And Mike, first of all, let's set the stage in general, because it seems like a lot riding on more than I can remember of some previous debates in U.S. presidential history on this particular showdown.
That's right. There is a whole lot at stake here. Number one, because the polls are just so darn close. But number two, this isn't a rematch. This isn't, well, we know how this is going to play out. We really don't know how this is going to play out tonight, because you have Kamala Harris. This will be her first debate against Donald Trump. She's only 7 weeks in to her presidential campaign. Hard to believe it's only 7 weeks now, but that's the reality of the situation. She's still an unknown in a lot of different areas in terms of her policies. Donald Trump accuses her of essentially changing by the day, being a chameleon in terms of her policies. Will she stick to the line that's been distributed through the White House in terms of Joe Biden's policies? Does she branch out on her own? Does she try to find some middle ground in between? Trump will make hay of it either way. If you're sticking with Biden, well, then you failed. If you're going out on your own, well, then you're changing your mind. So it'll be interesting to see how Harris walks that line tonight. Then you got Donald Trump on the other side. Well, Harris says that if he opens up his mouth, he lies. So how often do you try to rebut and take up your own oxygen, trying to dispute what he says, trying to correct the record, as Harris puts it? So that there's going to be that dynamic back and forth between the two of those tonight. Obviously, a lot of the talk will be about economy. Harris wants to keep the focus on domestic issues like abortion. But as you mentioned, certainly foreign policy will pop up during this debate. It'll pop up in terms of Afghanistan, which is still fresh on everybody's mind now that we're off the anniversary of the withdrawal and the deadly circumstances of that, which Trump lays at the feet of the Biden administration. Biden says it's Trump's fault for even making the deal with the Taliban to begin with. You've got that in the mix right now. 9/11, obviously, tomorrow. That'll come up in terms of protecting the nation, in terms of protecting the southern border. Trump says there are terrorists flowing through the southern border, and Kamala Harris didn't do enough in her job on immigration to protect the southern border. And of course, I think we're going to get a question tonight about Israel, about the Israel-Hamas war, about how it's being handled by the Biden administration, what Trump would do differently, what Harris might do differently should she take the White House. So all of these things compacted within a 90-minute debate. The microphones will be turned off. If you're not speaking, then you don't have a chance to interrupt. That's one of the policies for tonight. Trump will not have a chance to implode among himself by directly trying to step over Kamala Harris, but he will certainly have the opportunity to unleash those attacks that he's famous for. His advisors have told him, hey, settle down, keep it about policy. That'll be another thing to watch for tonight, whether Trump can really stay on message, on policy, where he has an advantage according to voters, or if he's going to go for those personal insults, which tends to turn the independents off and more toward the other side of the political spectrum. So a lot of things to watch for within just a short 90-minute debate tonight.
Right. I'm just going to mention, Mike, you said an advantage on issues for Donald Trump. I would say not on the abortion issue, but on some other issues, economy. And certainly Donald Trump thinks on Israel. He thinks he's the one who's been raising the issue in his campaign. It's something that Kamala Harris seems that she'd prefer not to get into, along with issues such as the campus protests, the pro-Palestinian, the anti-Semitism that goes with them. That certainly seems to be something Donald Trump wants to talk about more than Kamala Harris.
You know, it was interesting. We were at the Republican Jewish Coalition event in Las Vegas last week, and I spoke to a number of Republican officials, including a Jewish RNC spokeswoman, Elizabeth Pipko, and I asked her, listen, Trump can play to this particular audience, a Republican Jewish audience, but how much does Israel, how much does the issue of anti-Semitism really play in to the campaign as a whole? How much do Americans at large really care about this particular issue, and how much should capital and messaging and oxygen should Republicans, including Trump, spend on taking this message out to the masses? She said it shouldn't stop in Las Vegas. It shouldn't just be addressed to Republican Jews. She said it should be a winning message no matter what, that it's not even a political issue anymore. Pipko told me it's a matter of life and death, and too many people are dying right now in the Israel-Hamas war, and it needs to be a winning message, and is a winning message for Republicans as a whole if Trump chooses to go down that route. So for the Republican messaging machine, at least from a PR perspective, they feel this plays to the masses that it is a winning issue for Donald Trump in terms of handling Israel, in terms of handling anti-Semitism, in terms of what he would do or not do to bring about an end to the Israel-Hamas war. Interesting how he'll approach that tonight when asked about it.
Right. What happened in Las Vegas at the Republican Jewish Coalition, probably they're saying shouldn't stay in Las Vegas, and we'll see if Donald Trump brings it to Philadelphia this evening. Mike Wagenheim in Washington, D.C. Thank you for that. I'd like to thank Eitan Dangot and Ariel Osran for joining us on this edition of The Rundown. Thank you for joining us here on I-24 News, and let's see the hostages back home in any way possible, safe and sound. Thank you for joining us this evening.